Yeah, my name is Thomas, nevertheless, and I hope that we can become more and rather personal here and not so formal with all the degrees and so. First of all, I bring greetings from Jeff Tunnicliffe, the International Director of World Evangelical Alliance. Not just because he gives his greetings to any consultation of this kind, but because we discuss TEE quite a lot, not only TEE, but one of the biggest problems the evangelical movement worldwide has in the moment, you could say a luxurious problem, a problem of too much success. That is the vast number of people that get baptized into Christian churches every day without any background about Christian religion. And the number is growing so fast that the number of leaders, religious personnel, you would call them, in the sociology of religion does not grow at the same time. And you probably know better than I do that especially in Africa, in Asia, e.g. in China, this does not only mean that a lot of people leave through the back door again. In sociology of religion for Latin America, we have two categories for the statistics, which we call post-evangelicals and post-Pentecostals. Now we have to listen. No sleep now. We have an own category of millions of people which we call post-evangelical and post-charismatic because we don't know where to put them else. Because they no longer belong to the earlier categories, but they have left the movements again. Probably in Latin America that is especially dramatic. So this is the one problem, of course, and that cannot be of our interest. But second, of course, it is the danger, which already the New Testament mentions often enough, that if we do not produce good leaders, bad leaders will come in. And on the fringe of the evangelical movement, we have a lot of prophets and I don't know how to call them, sect leaders, etc., etc. We are glad that they all only have one life. So in most cases, after they have died, the movements that they head up normally come back into the big family again. But nevertheless, that's a real danger which we discuss quite often. Then I bring greetings from a man that is mentioned in, do I have it here? Mentioned in the article that was passed out to all of you by Patricia Harrison on 40 years on the evolution of theological education by extension, which is John Langlois. I met with him 3 days ago, and he loved to be here because many years back he was instrumental, together with others, of course, with Bruce Nichols and others, working for the Theological Commission of the World Evangelical Alliance, or by then the World Evangelical Fellowship. They visited in 1969 the people in Guatemala where TEE had started and discussed how this could be brought over to Asia, and some of the first beginnings at that time, at the beginning of the 70s, are represented here and probably could say much more. He gives you his warmest greetings, and he told me even so he soon left it to Asian hands, of course, He is really proud of what has come out of the very small beginnings, in the beginnings of the 70s. And he still has theological education in Asia on his prayer list. I represent the Theological Commission of the World Evangelical Alliance, and I want to tell you very clearly that beside any tension there might have been in history, and beside all the discussions which, as somebody heading up a TEE institution knows very well about accreditation and the sometimes good and often not so good cooperation with resident schools, etc., that the Theological Commission not only in the late 60s and 70s, but still today sees theological education by extension not as an emergency something, because we have too many people, because we cannot train people enough, etc., not as something extra, but as an integral part of the evangelical world, as an integral part of theological training for the next generation. And if we think that we would go back to a time where resident theological schools were the only thing we could think of, if we would go back to the 60s, imagine for a moment what would not have happened. How many leaders we would not have today, which only had to have become leaders by TEE. My personal involvement with TEE had two reasons. Number one, my father became a Christian when he was 34. Came from an atheistic background. All my relatives, they hate anything that has to do with religion. And he became a Christian, and at that time, when you were 33 or 4 years old, you were too old for the ministry. Believe it or not. Nobody can really tell you why. Nobody can point to any verse in the Bible. Somebody doesn't like that, what I say. Nobody can point to a verse in the Bible or to anything in history which tells you that you only may run for office when you start young. There have been times in history, and of course there have been many cultures in the world, where you would say the other way around, 34 is much too young to get into a leadership position. But at that time the situation was very clearly, people training for the ministry normally would study theology, and that meant it would be their first subject, their first training. And at 34, you were expected to go on with your secular profession forever. So what my father did, it was to pray all his life that his kids would go into the ministry. I remember that in the first church where I became junior pastor, I experienced just the same. My senior pastor was 55 years old. And one of the most successful evangelical pastors we ever had in Germany. But when he got the call to the ministry, after a heavy life in industry, earning a lot of money, it was not the case that all the churches were happy and said, oh, we get a pastor for free. I mean, he owned enough never to need a salary. But, I mean, he didn't have a theological training, and of course there was no way for him to get theological training. So he nevertheless got this church, and I was so lucky to work under him. And he urged me again and again and said, Thomas, if somebody like me starts to become a pastor with 55, there needs to be some way that I can get my theological training while I'm on the job. With 55, I cannot wait until I'm 65 to start. I start now. I have run big business, so why not become a leader in the church? But I lack a lot of theological wisdom. And why is there no way to get it while I'm in ministry? That was the same story of my father. So my father was lucky. I went to study theology for 4 years, and after I had finished it, I decided that even so I would have to do my career in the system for accreditation reasons and to accept it in German culture, that surely would not be a solution for the future. Because when I finished school, I knew about a lot of things which I never would need. Most of the things were things my professor needed when they were in ministry. But most of them were out of ministry for 20, 30 years already because they were teaching in theological institutions. Yeah? And I remember when I was 10 years in pastoral ministry, I taught at a residence school. Don't misunderstand me, residence schools can be everything from here to there. And I'm not blaming everything on residence schools. I'm speaking about a very specific one. But nevertheless, it was the best evangelical we had in Germany. When I was 12 years in ministry, and they invited me for a guest lecture, I went to the faculty of 11 people teaching there to count how many years of ministry they have altogether. And all the 11 people altogether had 10 years of experience in actual ministry. So I myself, with 12 years, had more experience than the whole faculty. Because in Germany that was the system. Yeah? If you wanted to go to theological training, you would do your own training, you would do your doctorate, you would start to teach in an unimportant theological school, and then you would climb up till you would end up in a real important theological school. You never had seen the ministry from the inside. Those people taught me, and after 4 years I knew that I had been taught by medical doctors who never have helped real people. Can you imagine this? Yeah? You go to a doctor who only in theory heard from other doctors what he should do, but never had to do with real people. This was the start of our own program, and I could tell you a lot of stories out of this time, and but they will be so similar to your stories that it will not help you much. We have, to give you some examples, in Eastern Germany, which was the former communist Germany, the church was virtually wiped out. When the reunification of Germany came, we just celebrated the 20th anniversary, evangelical churches in the communist Germany were virtually non-existing. Because of the political situation, everybody in the East wanted to move to the West, including everybody who wanted to train for the ministry. And we knew that in this situation, no theological institution could live on in Eastern Germany. All these institutions that were there just died. So we planted several of our TE centers in East Germany, with a lot of debates, churches being against it, especially the state church was against us, which is a big thing in Germany. If the state church is against you, they can cause you a lot of trouble. Only 3 years later, we got a letter from the presiding bishop there, from the state church, from the liberal state church, how thankful he is that we are there, because we have kept a long list of his best workers in his local churches, which otherwise would have moved to the West. And I tell you, when they move to the West, normally they just get lost. They never move back. They don't get a missionary spirit to move back to atheist Eastern Germany. They just disappear in the normal theological world. I already mentioned the Theological Commission is aware that our biggest theological problem is not define our theology, but to assure that everybody that becomes a Christian gets at least the chance to understand the basics about our Christian faith. Otherwise, we soon will be in a situation where our commissions on the top will become better and better and better because we are globalized. I mean, we can rely on a fantastic pool of people, I tell you. Yeah? And if you are World Evangelical Alliance, you can gather the best people in the world from every country, from every situation. And you, not only the Theological Commission, the same problem for a lot of other institutions, that on the top you become better and better, and on in the millions on the ground, we just lose what we thought we had won when looking to the statistics. Nobody in the moment knows, for example, in China, how many of those evangelicals that are counted there, and the tens of millions, are really evangelicals. We only can hope and pray that the number is high. But you all know that the problem of strange movements coming in there, and knowing who is only a prophet, and who has become more important than Prophet Jesus, is an open question. A second topic is very important. The World Evangelical Alliance has had a Religious Liberty Commission for more than 150 years old. It is much, much older than the Theological Commission. That is when, in the middle of the 19th century, the World Evangelical Alliance was founded. One of the major reasons was to fight persecution and to work towards religious liberty or religious freedom. That meant on the one side that the World Evangelical Community came together to help those brethren and sisters under persecution. This is nothing new. This is not a new topic. It is not that we have something like Advocates International now suddenly World Evangelical Alliance starts to get involved in politics and in law and all this kind of stuff because we have lost our theological base. It's our history. In 1849, a commission of pastors from several countries visited the Sultan in Turkey on behalf of the Christians in Turkey. In 1852, the commission visited the Tsar in Russia. And interestingly enough, in most cases, those commissions did not act on behalf of other evangelicals. Sometimes they did. But they really meant religious freedom not only for themselves, but for all. But of course, the whole topic of persecution, year by year, becomes a more central topic. And the Theological Commission, and of course the Religious Liberty Commission, which has been there for quite some time, see this as a very vital question, how we can cope with this. It is a political question. The whole matter of persecution runs us into the political situation of all states in the world. And meanwhile, it is not only the typical countries of persecution, but we have to be active in the free countries as well. The European Court of Human Rights just decided that the Catholic Church was not allowed, in Germany, was not allowed to dismiss somebody playing the organ because he got divorced. Well, we might say in the moment, we have another position on divorce and we don't care about the Catholic Church. Well, you know, it's just by chance that this time it has been the Catholic Church. Tomorrow it's us. The European Union puts a lot of pressure on the religious communities that they have to follow their standards. And what was quite clear until 5 to 10 years ago that religious communities would decide on their inner affairs for themselves is totally changing. And so World Evangelical Alliance and regional alliances, even in the free countries, have to start to defend our religious positions and our religious freedom. This becomes a very a major topic, and this, of course, includes the question of theological education in countries where you have persecution. So even if we would say for a moment, non-TEE programs would be much better than TEE programs, we still would have to have many countries with TEE programs because it's the only way to do theological education there. Let's take, for example, Turkey, where I'm involved myself. In Turkey, it's forbidden to Christians of any time to have a resident school. Whether it is the Greek Orthodox Church, the Armenian Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church, or us, doesn't make any difference. You are not allowed to have a building and to say, in this building we do something like theological education. On the other side, in Turkey you still have quite some freedom if you do not do it to public. Well, no problem for TEE. We change the place where the seminar is every time. We do it not secretly. I mean, the police always knows where we are. But the state does not need to get nervous that the certain building is used for this. They know we move around ourselves. Yeah? We tell our students not to run around and say we are students of theology. That makes the government nervous. And the interesting thing is that our TEE program is full of non-evangelicals because it's the only way to get theological training in Turkey, which creates a lot of new problems, of course, but this is not my topic now. So even if we would say, if you have the freedom to do something else than TEE, TEE still would be a very important thing for us because the majority of evangelical Christians meanwhile lives in areas where there is persecution or at least discrimination. Think a moment that in China alone we have more evangelicals than in the United States of America, which means that when you open the borders of China, you all can forget your English and you should quickly learn Chinese. Because 10 years later, all the big evangelical books no longer will be written in English, but in Chinese. I tell you, I mean, if you know some Chinese, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah? If you open the country, they will not sit around and wait until we invite them. Yeah? And they are convinced evangelicals. Yeah? They have, of course, an international network with all the other Chinese that have spread all over the world. So bye-bye Americans, only if China opens. Yeah? So, but take the huge number of Christians there, and you know in China there are certain ways of doing resident schools, but it is very, I mean, it's nothing for the big numbers. For the big numbers, we need TEE. There are three kinds of reasons for theological education by extension. Number one is theological reasons. This does not mean, don't misunderstand me, that when we talk about theological or even spiritual reasons, a TEE school automatically fulfills it, and another school automatically does not fulfill it. But when we talk about theological education in the New Testament, you all know that it does not exist there. And if we would be very much bound to the letter, we would say there was no theological education in the New Testament, there should not be no one. But that's not true. Theological foundation actually is much more basic to the church than most are aware of. Because besides dying for our sins, theological education was the only reason why Jesus came into the world. He did two things here. One was fulfill his mission in the sense of dying for the people. The second, and this is what you can read in John 20, in John 17, when he speaks to his Father, he tells the 12, you have given me. I have taught them everything. And the interesting thing is how he got those 12, or what he did when he got those 12. He went to a mountain, he prayed with his Father, he came down and had the name of the 12, and now the Gospels all tell us in similar words, so that they might be with him, and he might send them out. That is the basics of all theological education. You be with an example. Sorry, with Jesus it doesn't work any longer. He is gone, but this was what the disciples did. They lived together with Jesus. They got a combination out of lectures, private lectures with nobody present, public lectures with other people being present. Yeah? They got the personal experience and counseling, and they got the practical experience. And if you will follow this through the New Testament, we don't have time to do this now, you can see that this was a very specific program Jesus was following. So take, for example, I could take other example, the preaching. The first report we hear is that Jesus preached alone. Next we hear he preached alone, but he took the disciples with him. So they watched him. Next time we read a mix. Both were preaching. Next time we hear that the disciples were preaching, but Jesus was with them. In the second line, I don't know where he was standing. Next time we hear that he sent his disciple out to preach themselves and to report back. But still it was only for a very short time. Remind this marvelous story when they came back and said, we had the power over the bad spirits. And their theological teacher tells them, wait a minute, I think you have not listened to me. That's true, it's not wrong, but the order is wrong. Please understand that what the angels say in the kingdom of God is much more important than what you think what happened here. Amazing story. And then in the end, he sends them out altogether and leaves. I mean, if this is not a clear-cut program of training, which by the way would fit not only for theology, but for virtually everything. This is what I do with my kids, for example. This is what Paul takes over in his language, that he speaks about training people like you raise children. This is our theological base, that teaching content, teaching how to live, and teaching how to serve have always to be combined and not to separate it into different times or into different topics. They go together. You cannot teach in a seminar that somebody should love his neighbor who doesn't have a neighbor at the moment. And you constantly tell him, if I would have a neighbor, I would love him, and if in 5 years you will have a neighbor, I hope you will love him because I told you now. That's nonsense. Yeah? As Christians, we speak about loving our neighbors because we want to love our neighbors now. So the teacher needs a neighbor and needs to tell, like Jesus did it to his students, what he experienced when he tries to love his neighbor and how difficult that can be from time to time. And of course, we speak about the neighbors of our students. And they will find out how difficult it can be from time to time. As I said, not every theological education by extension program automatically combines